Welcome to part 8 of Bitovi Academy's Learn Docker training. At this point, we're building our image with the -t flag to tag it and the target flag in order to specify which stage to use. And then we're running our image with a name, port mapping, environment variable, and volume mounting. That's a lot of typing and memorization just to run a container. Docker Compose will condense all of this for us into one command, Docker Compose up. To get started, we're going to create two new files. We're going to create a .env file to store environment variables, and here we're going to define my port with a value of 8000, and then my_env with a value of dev. Then we're going to create a docker-compose.yml file. The first line of our Docker Compose file is going to be a version of 3.8. This is the schema version and is static across all Compose files. And we're going to define a list of services. Services are the same thing as containers, it's just different nomenclature between Docker and Docker Compose. We're going to call our service my_app. We're going to specify the image for our service, which is going to be my node app with a tag of my env. When you run any Docker Compose command, Docker Compose will automatically pick up the .env file, read those environment variables, and make them available throughout our file. In this case, because our current value is set to dev, then we'll be using the dev tag of our mynode image. We're going to add our port mapping to replace our -p flag in our Docker run commands. So that's going to look the same as -p, although instead of hard coding our application port, we're going to use the myPort environment variable. We're going to specify our volume mapping, which is going to map the source directory from our host machine to app/source. And lastly, we're going to specify environment variables to pass into our container, which is going to be port with the value of myPort. Now we can change the values within .env in order to customize the behavior of our image. All we have to do instead of running that long docker run command is go to our terminal and run docker compose up. Oops, my environment variable should be myPort, not port. We can open our browser to localhost port 9000 in order to check. And we'll see hello world. And then if we go and we make a change to our index.js to change it back to hello Bitovi and save it, we'll see the hot code reload log. And if we refresh our browser, we see hello Bitovi. I think you'll agree this is a lot easier than running that docker run command from before. We can kill our container by just passing in Control-C to our terminal. So now if we wanted to change the application port, we can go into our env file, change it to 9090, and if we want to run our production image, we just change this to prod. And if we run Docker Compose up, we'll see it's now running with node instead of nodemon, and it's running on port 9090. We're going to go back to our Compose file and add more to it in order to not only replace our Docker run commands, but replace our Docker build commands as well. Within our my_app service, we're going to add a build section, and within it we're going to have context with a value of dot. This is the same as telling Docker where to find the Docker file. And then we're going to pass in a target of my_env. This is replacing the target flag from the build command, allowing us to build either the prod image or the dev image. Going back to our terminal, if we kill our containers with Control-C, and then we can run docker compose build. And because our current env value is prod, we're going to build our prod image. So if I run docker image ls my node app prod, you can see it was built seconds ago. And then if I change my env to dev, again I can run docker compose build. But if we look at docker image ls dev, we can see our new image built 11 seconds ago. And same as before, we can run Docker Compose up to start it up. Docker Compose is great for replacing long Docker build and Docker run commands, but its key strengths are actually around container orchestration, which is running multiple containers and the dependencies between them. So within our Docker Compose file, let's add a database. We're going to create a new service. We're going to call it DB. We're going to use the MySQL 5.7 image, which will be pulled from Docker Hub for us. We're going to define a volume so that when a container is created and destroyed, we're not going to lose our database storage. We're going to call it DB data, and we're going to map it to var lib MySQL. And we're going to pass in a bunch of environment variables that we'll define in a moment. We need MySQL root password. We're going to define a MySQL database. We're going to define a MySQL user. And we're going to define a MySQL password. We're going to take these 4 variables and we're going to put them in our .env file. If you're wondering why I'm using these specific environment variables, if we go to Docker Hub and look at the MySQL image, we can go down and see the environment variables it expects. Lastly, before I forget, outside of our services objects, we need to define our volumes. In this case, DB data. And we're just going to use all the defaults for volume instantiation. And then same as before, if we want to start up both of these containers, we're going to run Docker Compose up. You'll see it doesn't have the MySQL image locally, so it's going to pull it for us from Docker Hub. And there we go. You can see in our database log, our MySQL database is now ready for connections. And if I scroll up, you can see that our application is running as well. And that's it. This course is taking you through Docker fundamentals, but has only scratched the surface of container orchestration with Docker Compose. Docker Compose actually has a very long list of commands you can look at with Docker Compose help, and has an extensive file reference. It could be an entire course in itself. I hope this course has whet your appetite on containers and orchestration. What do you want to see next?